welcome back to my channel. In today's video, it is going to be an essential one. Whether you are new to photography or looking to refine your skills, we are going to be talking about different camera modes, from trusty automatic to creative freedom of manual. So get at your cameras, we're gonna start practicing and learning out which mode is right for you. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. I have lots more videos coming your way in the new year. Hopefully you have your cameras in hand like I do, and we're gonna be going through each of the modes. The first one being automatic mode. So on your camera, you might either have a button that says mode, or you might have it in one of your menu banks. But what we're gonna be talking about first again is automatic. It is often labeled with an A or even just auto, and that's going to be kind of the most user-friendly mode that we have. In the automatic mode, essentially the brain is the camera. It's going to decide what the aperture is, the shutter speed's going to be, if there's a flash attached. It's going to choose all of those settings to help create the best picture possible given the scenario that you're in. So when is automatic mode your best friend? Well, it's when you are a beginner. So instead of having to make all those really technical decisions yourself, you're going to be able to focus on things like composition and focus and making sure that you are perfecting the craft of your art in the actual photo itself before any of the technical aspects. Auto mode, even as a seasoned professional, is something that's really great when you're wanting to capture a photo really quickly. We use it actually every day on our iPhones. We typically just take out our camera, point and shoot. There of course are a few little technical adjustments that we can make as we get to know our iPhone, but this mode is really great for making sure that we don't miss those fleeting moments without sacrificing the need to take a moment to be really technical and get some settings right. But of course, an automatic mode can sometimes come with some trade-offs. Your camera doesn't know if you're trying to get a stylistically moody or kind of that really trendy, blurry photo that's going on right now. So you need the ability sometimes to override that automatic mode, which is why the manual mode, as you get better and better, is something that you will really enjoy. But hey, every mode has a time and a place, whether you're shooting fast-paced sports or capturing the details in portraiture. Knowing which mode to use will help elevate your photography. Program mode, often labeled as the P on your camera, it allows your camera to decide on the exposure as well as the aperture and the speed of the shutter. And at the same time, it also is going to allow you to make some decisions, for example, like the ISO or a flash. And some cameras also actually let you do a few extra settings, but it kind of just depends. What's great about program mode, it kind of lets you balance and walk that tightrope between simplicity and control. So as you're learning, this is the next step up from that automatic mode, and it's right before you kind of start to get your feet wet into different types of modes before jumping off the deep end into that manual mode. It's time to now talk about semi-automatic modes, and there are a couple different ones in here. It's going to be aperture priority as well as shutter speed, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But for aperture priority, this was my pride and joy for so many years. It is what taught me photography as I know it today. And on your camera, it's going to be labeled either as aperture priority or aperture mode, labeled as the letter A or labeled as the letter AV. I want to take a moment and slow down for a second and talk about what aperture is, an analogy that helped me understand it. In a way, aperture is the eye of your camera. Just as your pupil contracts and expands according to lighting situations, that's kind of what aperture does. Aperture is measured by something that we call an f-stop. So when you're looking online or shopping for lenses or even taking a look on your lens on your camera, it usually says f something, f1.2, f2.8, f12, right? There's all these different numbers. So for example, this camera lens is an f1.4. And so the smaller the number is, the bigger the hole is in that lens, which allows more light to come in. So again, kind of think of it as your pupil. When you are in a dark setting, your pupil is opened up really big because it needs a lot of light to come in. And when you're outside, your pupil closes up because there's too much light coming in. So again, if you are in a dark setting, you want your camera lens to be able to open up really wide to be able to allow for better lighting and picture quality. Aperture isn't just for lighting, it also is going to be for what we call depth of field. So right now, digitally, this camera is causing some depth of field where the background is blurry, but it's done digitally instead of through the actual camera lens. And so a lot of the time when I'm giving mentoring about photography, people are asking me, how do you make that blurry background? How do you get the background to be so creamy? And the reason is because my lens has a low f-stop. I typically shoot not any lower than 2 or not any higher than 2.8, around there, 4 sometimes, depending on what my situation is, right? But at the end of the day, that is what's causing that blurry background. And those little circles that you see, it's called bokeh. B-O-K-E-H. It's a silly word, but that's what we're describing when you're talking about that milky, blurry background. It's because of the aperture of my lens. A lot of the time when you buy a camera, they come with a higher number of f-stop. They usually won't come with a kit that has a 1.4 f-stop because it's actually pretty expensive to have that type of aperture. So whenever you are looking for a new lens, I always suggest looking at around 1.8 f-stop, because if you go any lower, it can kind of be a little bit more difficult to focus, as well as they just get a lot more expensive. So I started out with buying all these new lenses that had a 1.8 f-stop. Of course, on the flip side, there are times where you don't want to always have a low f-stop, right? So I'm thinking about when I was traveling to Yosemite, right? I wanted a higher f-stop because I wanted to get that whole entire landscape feel. Otherwise, I would have had the background to be really, really blurry, and that's not something that I really would have wanted. So at the end of the day, when I was honing in my skills, I used aperture priority the most because it allowed me to mess with the depth of field and figure out how blurry my background I liked it to be without having to worry about if I'm overexposing a photo or underexposing a photo. So again, I definitely suggest this one. If you are learning, go ahead and jump right into this one. It will help you boost your portraiture to the next level pretty much immediately. All right, so the next mode we're going to be talking about is going to be shutter priority, also labeled as S or sometimes TV. And this is going to be able to control your motion of the camera. And a lot of the times it has to deal with time. So the amount of time it takes for your shutter to open or close and open. And it also allows for those pictures that you're seeing that are really trendy and that I really love, I'm not hating on them, where there's some motion going on, because it helps evoke a feeling where I think photography is kind of heading towards this emotional type of way. And I really, really love that. But again, that shutter priority is going to be important for timing of your shutter as well as the motion that's going on. Think about it for a second when you are capturing motion, right? If we're talking about children playing, right? Dogs, sports, you're going to need a very fast shutter to be able to capture those moments really crisp and clean. But there's other times where you're going to need a slower shutter speed. And typically that's going to be when you have a lower light setting, right? You're going to need a shutter to kind of slowly take the photo and open it. Or what about also night photography, right? If we're taking photos or long exposures of the sky, right? Of some stars, of some, light, whatever it may be, those are going to be ones where you're wanting a longer shutter speed. I really don't use shutter speed too often. I usually use it when it's a stylistic choice, whether it's a blurry photo, or perhaps it's a person standing and the bustling New York City streets behind them are moving and you get that blur in the background. So again, oftentimes this is going to be a personal preference stylistically rather than something I go to on a daily basis. Last but not least, we have manual mode, which is characterized by that M on your camera screen. And this is the steps where you really have learned photography and you are becoming a true artist. In manual mode, you have the reins. You are in control of aperture, shutter speed, you are in control of ISO, what the flash goes on and off. It's kind of like you are driving a manual car instead of an automatic. You are in control of the whole entire experience. I made a switch over to manual whenever I started to really want more of the creative control over my images, depending on different situations I was in. My biggest tip for manual mode is to adjust everything one at a time. Master each one of the elements. So first being ISO, right? Figuring out what the sensitivity needs to be for your lighting situation, jumping into aperture, and then jumping into shutter speed, right? And so I move each one of those things really incrementally, really small. And I typically have a model or someone out there testing on really quickly before I continue with my shoot. Remember, each mode has a time and a purpose, from auto mode and program mode, where again, you let the camera do its thing, from aperture and shutter mode, where you gain a little bit of creativity in those moments without, worrying about messing up a photo or a moment. And then you have manual mode, where you take full control of every situation, even the challenging ones. So I encourage you to kind of test out all of those, especially if you're new to photography. And if you've been seasoned for a while and you haven't played with manual mode, this is your sign. Do it now. I would love to see what you create with all these different modes. Comment down below if you have any further questions. I know this was simple and just a small introduction. If you ever want me to go any deeper into some of these different settings, let me know. I will look forward to seeing your comments. Other than that, thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next video.